Every individual must learn what it means to be human, and this understanding begins developing in early childhood. What matters most for our youngest children is how we are with them, how we show them what kindness, empathy, and respect look like. They are following their leaders. Welcome to the Leading for Children podcast. We're excited you're here with us today as we explore number 11, the final of the 11 simple rules to create thriving communities for children, Actionable. I'm Judy Jablon, founder and strategic advisor at Leading for Children. Joining me in today's conversation is my friend and LFC's executive director, Nichole Parks.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Judy. So thrilled to be here today. My name is Nichole Parks, and I am the Executive Director of Leading for Children. And we are so excited to have our special guest in this episode, Tsundzukani. Tsundzukani, would you please say hello and introduce yourself to everyone?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tsundzukani. I'm a tracker at Londolozi. I grew up just outside Game Reserve. Ever since I was born, I wanted to be a tracker. And I wanted to work in the game reserve, not knowing one day I will be a tracker. So fortunate enough, I being one of the people who are a female tracker, and not just a female tracker, a first and only tracker in Londolozi so far.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And Tsunzu, if it's okay, I'm going to do a little backstory about how we've become friends. So Tsundzukani Whatsi is my new friend who I met in May of this year when I had the privilege of spending several days with her. She, along with one of her colleagues at the Game Reserve, Londolozi, offered us an extraordinary experience learning about the animals and the plants and all that's in the South African bush. And what I particularly loved about meeting you, Tsunzu, is your warmth and your caring, and the fact that within minutes, I felt like you were my sister, my dear, dear friend. And so thank you today for joining us. And we're so excited to have you as a conversation partner as we talk about the word and the concept of actionable learning. Nichole, can you get us started as we think about what does the phrase actionable learning mean to each one of us?
Thank you, Judy, for that invitation. When I think about the word actionable, I automatically think about something I can use. So useful comes to mind, practical comes to mind, and I can do it again comes to mind.
Thanks. I'll go next. For me, the idea of learning something and being able to, as you said, Nichole, use it in a practical way really makes me own what it is that I'm learning. And I think that when I was a little girl, I loved learning things I could do because I could hold on to them. As I've gotten older, I find that some things I learn go right out of my head, whereas other things I learn, they stick. And so a lot of what makes learning actionable for me is, as you said, that usefulness, but it's also like it sticks, it stays with me. Tsunzu, what about you? What does actionable mean to you?
For me, as I grow up, I love doing something that gonna benefit other people at the end of the day. So that's why when I had to choose the careers, I choose to be a female tracker because there are no female tracker in, I would say, in the whole South Africa. So I wanted to be one of the example that we can do it as a female. I wanted to encourage a lot of girls out there that we can do it as well. So learning something from at very young age that at the end of the day you're going to benefit other kids, it's a big deal for me. So I want to encourage a lot of girls out there that they can do it as well. It is possible for everyone.
Nichole, I can imagine that you were feeling some of the feelings that I was feeling. For me, in choosing my career, I also felt like I wanted to do something that was useful, that would make a difference. And I think that's why I chose to be a teacher, because by being a teacher, I knew I would be touching the lives of others and that I could support them in feeling powerful and strong and competent. Nichole?
I too had very similar reasons for choosing my career. I knew that I wanted to make a difference. And I knew maybe intuitively, I'm not sure, maybe because of the models that I had, I just saw working with children as a way to really do that. So I knew that I wanted to make a difference. And I also knew that I wanted to make a difference for children, especially those who possibly had felt invisible or not seen their own power. And so that's why I chose it too.
I think a theme that we just described across all three of us is my desire to activate curiosity. And I think yours was supporting children in feeling visible and having power. And Sunzu, your story also was about making something accessible to girls, particularly in your country. Let's just dig a little deeper. Nichole, before we go to how learning has made your life or our lives as a trio more meaningful, can you talk about Gracie, your daughter, a little bit, and Tay about them as actionable learners and what you've observed in your own children?
Sure. So Gracie is my 12-year-old who will be 13 soon. And Tay is my 8-year-old grandson. And then I have a 7-year-old granddaughter named Gigi.
Mm,
And as I watch them, one thing that I've really realized they've taught me on a deeper level is that children are capable of so much. The capacity that they have for learning is endless, and for them, they learn best when they're in, I call it being in the driver's seat. So, what Gracie taught me about actionable learning is to trust the child, to have some understanding of their own curiosity and most importantly of their limits and their abilities. And so she is the child that would climb really high before she was 2 years old and puff her chest out and felt very accomplished. And I remember one day we talked about this actually earlier this week. We were laughing about it. She'd climbed up on the back of the couch and she wasn't two yet. And I was in a meeting on Zoom and I quickly jumped up and grabbed her and put her down on the floor for safety reasons. And I just remember her being frustrated with me with her whole body, like hands, feet stumping with her whole body. And she looked at me and she climbed back up there again. And I took her down again and I said, safe feet. And she just marched herself right back up there. And so then I just stopped and I looked at her and she went, hi, like when she got up on the top. And I said, yes, you did climb really high. You're able to climb high and stay safe. Okay. And I stood and I let her kind of maneuver. And then she got down and she was so proud of herself. And what that taught me was actionable is also about doing. And sometimes we have to create a safe enough space for children to take what I call safe risks in learning, because even to this day, that was so much more about her internal will and her ability to follow things through and to trust herself than it even was about her gross motor movements. And so those are the
mm.
types of things that I've learned just watching them, that they are very capable and their capacity for learning is really huge. if we can create ways for them to do it and use it.
So let's hold on to this idea. I'm saying this to us as the three of us in this conversation, and also to those of you who are listening, that ideas that we've kind of grasped here are that actionable learning, whether we're 3 or 2 or 32 or 52 or 72, are things that we get to do and then we get to use. And then there's kind of the purpose. And Tsunzu, you introduced us to this idea of the way you wanted to put something into action was driven by this sense of purpose. Well, so was Gracie at 2. Her sense of purpose was, look what I can do. Her pride, her sense of accomplishment, of feeling powerful. So, with that, I think we've begun to explore this idea about how actionable learning enriches our lives. What I'd like to do, Tsunzu, is invite you to kind of tell the story of the pathway that you took. Sort of, yes, you knew you wanted to do this. You described to me in much detail what the process of learning to be a tracker was. And for those of you who are listeners, let me give a little more background about what a tracker is. We'll put in our podcast notes a picture of Tsunzu doing her job in South Africa. But there's a vehicle, and the vehicle drives through the bush to take guests to see the wild animals. And Tsunzu sits on a seat in front of the vehicle, basically watching and listening. You are an incredible observer of sight and sound, and you look at the tracks on the ground, and you look for things in the trees, and you look for evidence in the trees of where an elephant has been, and you smell smells that tell you, oh, if we follow this path, we're going to see this. So you had to learn a great deal from starting when you were young to now, where you're still learning. Can you describe in lots of details to help our listeners understand the power of how you've gone about learning this amazing skill of tracking the animals in the bush, including, if you want, one of those stories that you shared with us at dinner about how actionable your learning was?
Okay, thanks, Jay. So the learning program, I went to Trek Academy. So Trek Academy, it's an organization that is owned by the 2 gentlemen who was a trekker and a ranger back there in Londolozi. So they established this back in 2010. They used to recruit boys only, 10 boys per year. So 2019, that's where they introduced girls, but they only take 2 girls per year. And 2022, that's where I did my trekking course. I did a year course at the Kalahari, which is based on Northern Cape. I did 6 months without going home. I went home for 10 days and went back for another 6 months. So the reason for this course to take the whole year, they want you to be confident enough to walk on your own in the bush. You don't hold any rifle, you just hold a stick. So when I'm in the vehicle or in the car, I usually grab my stick to mark the track that I see in the ground because I just want to avoid going down or bending down. I'll tell you the story of going down. So they teach you from animal tracks, track and sign, birds, trees, everything about that. So they'll tell you everything from animal behavior, when to go to the animal, when not to go to that animal. So you know exactly when to approach the animal and when to leave it. So after Trekker Academy, I went to Londolozi and worked as an intern for a whole year. After that, I got a permanent job at Londolozi. But before, I started loving trekking where my uncle used to take me in the bush. And so basically, when I grew up, I was the first child at home. And if you are the first child, you need to look after the cattle's at home or the goats. So the boy is supposed to do that. But because I was the first child, I needed to step in. So I used to go to the bush with my uncle, and he used to show me tracks on the ground. That's where I became more passionate about nature. So I remember the other day when I was on Trek Academy doing my trekking course. It was our first week. We followed a group of 8 lions. In total, we're 10 with our facilitators and his assistant. So when I follow the lions, the tracks become more fresh. I didn't know that the tracks are now fresh. I bent down and tied my shoes. The lion were very close, and I didn't know that they were very close. I just heard the loud voice growling very close to me, and the dust was all over my face. When I looked back at my friends, they were all gone. And the facilitator just told me to stand still. Running is not an option because if you run, animal see you as a weak predator. So he just said, if you run, I can shoot you. Just stand still. I waited there. When I moved back, the animal keep on coming. When I stand my ground, they just stand there. But fortunate enough, we made our way out from that situation. So I've asked myself, I had this conversation with myself that I really want to continue with this course. Will I able to do it? So I ended up finding a solution that you don't want to do this, but you love to do this. So I ended up telling myself that if you love something, you go for it. If you want something, even if you can lose it, it doesn't matter. So for me, loving nature, it's in the blood.
Thank you for sharing that, Sunzu. As you talked, I really thought about what you just said about if you love it. You invited me to think about actionable in a different way. If you love it, even if it's not something that you'll do forever, still go for
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
Still go for it. And so that makes me think part of actionable too is about feeling fulfilled in
Yes.
what you're learning and what you're doing. Thank you for sharing your story.
Well, another thing that I heard, Sunzu, in your story is safe risk. Because obviously, in Gracie's case, mom was right there and could catch Gracie, and Nichole was teaching her that her desire to do it was as important as the possibility that something would happen. And in your case, you weren't two, you were thinking about your career, your future. And while your future and your career is your passion, it's also your livelihood. You're also supporting your family with this livelihood. And you overcame your fears. And I've been thinking a lot about confidence relative to actionable learning. And it isn't exciting and worth learning if there isn't a challenge in it. And so your challenge with lions is a big challenge, but the way that you now have it as part of who you are, it's just in you. And so you've taken something that you had to aspire to, have years of study for, big risks, and now it's yours. You possess it. Your story is a little hard for Nichole and me to follow. But let's talk about safe risks a little bit. Nichole, do you have a story in your life about something that you had to really push through and deal with issues of confidence and struggle in order to take something that was actionable and make it yours?
There are several that comes to mind. One really, I talk about it, I think, in our OL journal that we wrote. Really the learning that I was making actionable was trusting my voice enough to be willing to put it out there, even if what I thought was different than everybody else in the room. And so I was in a meeting and we were making decisions for providers across the state. We were making a lot of big decisions. And I kept hearing a specific word being used. And for every time I would hear it, I would go, something about this is uncomfortable. So the way in which we were talking, I kept hearing different people use the word they. And I was taking notes, and finally I realized, I was like, oh, I've heard they now maybe 7 times. And I was sitting and wanting to say, let's pause and let's think about how we're talking about the people we're making the decisions for, because I think it is influencing how we make the decisions. And nobody else was. And so I kept asking myself, maybe you're the outlier. Maybe you're the outlier. And so finally, I really just had to harness confidence, and I had to really trust myself. And I had to say to myself, if you say something and your feelings get hurt, you just have to be okay with that. And so I did. I said something, and I can't say that it changed everything. However, it did influence our decisions at the end. And we did create a decision that was more favorable for the people we were making the decisions for.
You know, early on, Tsunzu, you talked about wanting to be a model for girls and about how a big part of why you took on this challenge of actionable learning was not just for your livelihood and your career, but the impact of your career. Nichole, your story, in its very important right, is quite similar in theme. That if people don't call attention to ways that our society abuses power and speaks about other people in ways that are condescending, we don't change. And so, Tsunzu, you're doing it in South Africa, you know, post-apartheid, not just saying, I'm going to pursue a career with actionable learning that other women haven't been able to. I'm also going to model for the future of our country and for girls and women in our country. And Nichole, you've been that champion, whether it's something you write on Facebook or how you show up at a meeting or how you guide us as the organization to keep learning and to put into action things we're passionate about. And I think that's an important part of actionable learning. I guess a a little bit of a risk that I want to take, and it made me immediately think about Leading from Strength, Nichole, and about the project that I'm going to invite you to talk about in a moment of how that's actionable learning for us as an organization, and very much in alignment with the stories that we're sharing of finding your power and not being invisible. Starting LFC for me was actionable learning. It was taking things that I knew and saying, I'm going to take a risk. And many of you who are listening know, Nichole certainly knows, that it's been an uphill slog because we're asking people to think about a shift in the culture of how we show up for children, for families, and for each other. And that it isn't about putting initiatives into classrooms that is going to change equity and learning for children. It's us as the adults in their lives behaving in ways that the two of you model as parents and educators every day. Tsunzu, you model it as an educator for those of us that have the privilege and opportunity of visiting, you know, the bush. Nichole, you model it every day in how you show up in the world. I hope I do too. And I think that may be something we want ourselves and our listeners to take away from this conversation about actionable is you got to do it to have an impact. And what you do has to feel useful to you and be useful to others. That feeling powerful and accomplished and having pride in what you do is the essence of using yourself as what Amy Dombrow, our friend, would say, your own best resource. So maybe, Nichole, you could share a little bit about the actionable learning around leading from strength.
Sure. So, Leading from Strength is a LFC program that's fairly new, I would say. And for some context, this was really birthed at the end of 2020, going into 2021. So, if you're familiar with what was happening in our country at that time, we were really at the height of what was potentially a great racial reckoning and awakening. And during that time, we were hearing from different members as we were interacting of all ethnicities, just describing this fatigue, this discomfort, in being in the world. And so we had an opportunity to begin to think about how might we create a space for women of color to be able to share their stories, to have some what I call respite, because there is a very real exhaustion that comes from showing up in the world and having to filter parts of yourself. And so we had the opportunity to pilot this in two places. And the evaluation that came back out of it was very enlightening in seeing how it had a huge impact for people. And so we wanted to take it national. And with funding, in part from the Dodge Family Fund. And I do have to just say, with huge support from Judy, as a partner, she knew that I wanted to do this. And she really supported me in all ways to do it. And so initially, I thought, as a Black woman, out of respect to all the many diverse women of color out there, you should have this cohort be for Black women because you probably aren't equipped, frankly, to create a safe space for all women of color because you don't know everyone's story. And so Serene Stevens, a dear friend and colleague of ours, co-facilitated a conversation with me at the National Association for the Education of Young Children's Professional Learning Institute. And in the room, there were lovely women, beautiful women of all colors and all ethnicities. And they began to tell their stories. And there were tears and there were cheers. And one woman in particular stood up. And she shared how, when you looked at her, she looked like she was an African American woman. And when she began to speak, it was so evident that she had a Hispanic heritage. And she talked about how she never belonged anyplace in the world. And she said, today, for the first time, I felt like I belonged. And as different women began to affirm that, the actionable learning that we took was we could indeed create a space that was welcoming, that people saw themselves and felt like they belonged. And so as a result, we actually have expanded the national cohort for all women of color. And so that was a learning that I don't know that we would have ever had if we didn't have that conversation in such a broad way. And so I'm thrilled for what will come of that, what will become. And I'm especially excited about how the women that we learn and grow with in this cohort will go back and be models like you are, Tsundzukani, in their communities, and how other young girls will see themselves represented in some powerful ways.
I invited Nichole to share the story of leading from strength because leading for children is engaging in actionable learning. We are taking a risk of trying to show up in the world to model humanity first. And we have to be risk takers. We have to learn with and from others and get to feel like we've bent down to tie our shoe and the lion's coming at us because it's not going so well. Or we have to be Nichole, the mom, watching Gracie take the risk. And oops, Nichole is anxious. But if we don't keep pushing by being actionable learners, everything stays the same. And I guess I'd like to first invite you, Tsunzu, as you listened to Nichole and heard about leading from strength for the first time, did something come to mind that you wanted to either respond to or share?
Yes, I would like to. Thanks, Nichole. Thanks for the words of encouraging. You inspired me a lot. The way you are so brave, you are so strong. I like it. And it also encouraged me not to stop learning. I'll keep on learning and keep on teaching other people, other generation. It's a big deal for me.
Thank you for that, Tsunzu. And as you were talking, instantly I went, "You are so strong. You are so powerful. I haven't met you in person, and already you're impacting me." And I think the beauty of these types of communities, of all of us being able to come together, is that we help each other be brave and we help each other be strong. And that's such a different way of thinking about actionable learning. There is strength when we can come together and tell our stories. And I really appreciate both you and Judy for your stories today.
One thing I'd like to ask you, Tsunzu, if you're willing, the importance of being a model for girls and for girls in your country. And I know there's a girl in your house who is very special in your life. Can you tell us a little bit about your daughter and about how you talk with her about your work?
So I'm blessed with two beautiful children. My son, he's 14 years old. My daughter, she's 6 years old. She's a lovely girl. So my daughter, she has these imaginary friends of which I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe she's going crazy. But Judy explained it to me that it is normal. Now I'm starting to relax. I remember other day she grabbed a frog. I'm terrified of reptiles, to be honest. I don't like frogs, chameleons, and snakes. I don't like that. So she grabbed the frog and come back in my house with it. She know I'm scared of that. So that's why I seen that this girl, she's super strong. She's brave enough. She inspired me to hold it, and I ended up holding it. And it felt like it's nothing, it's harmless. But I was so terrified about it.
Thank you for sharing that, Sunzu. When Sunzu and I were together in South Africa, and she told me about her daughter and her daughter's imaginary friends, I thought to myself, when I was little, I had an imaginary friend, and that was how I did my actionable learning. I cared for my friend. I practiced so many things with my imaginary friend. And so I think it was hard for the adults around me to appreciate that that was my way of learning things. And so I think by hearing your story, Tsunzu, we're saying to all the families who are listening to this, all the educators who are also parents, that children find different ways of making learning actionable for themselves. Your daughter finding the frog and being the boss of you and making you overcome your fears, having her imaginary friends, Gracie climbing, that children are wanting to teach us. And we are better humans when we let them. Anything you want to add, Nichole?
Yes, Sun Tzu, as you were talking about your daughter, I felt so much joy And it brought me right back full circle to modeling. I'm like, of course she is strong. Of course she is powerful. Of course she has this sense of fearlessness because you're living that before her.
Children are watching us. Today's podcast is the last in our series about the 11 simple rules, and we wanted to do something a little different today. First of all, I had this privilege. I wanted Nichole to meet Tsunzu. Thank you so much, Tsunzu, for spending time with us today, and thank everybody at Londolozi, your amazing team, for supporting you in being able to be on Zoom with us. We are so, so grateful to have heard your powerful story about taking this risk and becoming one of the first female trackers in the country of South Africa, and hopefully it will spread to other areas in the continent. I personally am going to be your champion as you take on the next big step in your career of going from tracker to guide, because children are watching us. If we engage in actionable learning, they will engage in actionable learning. If we model power and pride and strength and safe risk taking, they will do it too. If we're curious, excited learners, they will be too. At Leading for Children, our approach to building strong communities for us and our children starts with each one of us. Thank you so much, Nichole and Tsunzu, for a very fun and enjoyable conversation. And thanks to our community for joining us in today's conversation about actionable learning experiences, the 11th of our simple rules to create thriving communities for children. Julia Connolly, our producer, thank you so much for keeping us on the path of growing our community of Humanity First members. We invite you all to check out our book about the 11 simple rules. You can find it in the library on our website at www.leadingforchildren.org. And please stay in the loop about what we're doing at LFC by subscribing to our newsletter via our website. See you all next month.